joy to the world.
Oh, joy!
Spreading good cheer this holiday season. WVOX Worldwide.
1460 WVOX.
Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome, everybody, to Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm Peter Moses with my co-host, John Sharan.
Happy Thanksgiving,
and Ardina
Peter.
Seward. Happy Thanksgiving to you. And Ardina, I know you had a fabulous, interesting meal for Thanksgiving that you prepared.
It was international. It's what we've done every year since my daughter was a little girl, because I always had to work Thanksgiving. So the only places open at that time were Chinese restaurants.
So well characterized in
or Indian restaurants.
Christmas Story.
or Indian restaurants.
Or Indian restaurants. So it kind of became a Seward tradition. And this year she brought her new beau, who is fabulous, and we introduced him to the eclectic Thanksgiving celebration. And I got to say, Kyle joined right in. So Kyle, welcome to the Adams family, or the Seward family.
Well, we have a couple of guests today, and our first guest is an actor and a writer, and I believe he's an activist as well. And his name is Amir J Williams. He starred in A Different World as J.T. Raylands.
All My Children.
No, A Different World.
Okay.
He's in All My Children as well. That's true, and he also was in a movie with Cuba Gooding Jr., Moira Kelly, who I've never understood what happened to her career because she was beautiful and talented, Omar Epps, who's had a brilliant career, and Martha Plimpton, who made Odd look good. Amir, welcome to our show.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
So, what are you up to right now? I understand that you're promoting a new novel called Flame of Retribution. And what is that about? It's a very interesting title. What does it mean?
Thank you so much. Yes, that's true. I just released a novel earlier this year, the end of April, and it's inspired by the Sean Bell shooting. As many of you remember, a young man named Sean Bell was killed in 2006, the night before his wedding, by police. And so it's inspired by that story. It's fiction, but it's inspired by that story.
And tell us about the premise. I know it's inspired by it, but it's a fictionalized account, or it's all factual?
Yes, it's fictional, but the factual part is based on some of the news reports, the incident that happened that night, and also the court case that happened subsequently after. But the rest of it is fiction. Basically, the premise is once a young man is killed on the night of his wedding by police, and once they're found to be exonerated, to be not guilty of anything, the wife becomes a vigilante and begins going after the guilty police officers. So it's the first in a series. There's going to be two more, and I've been promoting it since April, doing different signings around the city and around Westchester as well.
You know, that was a very I don't even have to tell you, that was a very controversial case. In one instance, he meaning Sean had been found to be intoxicated, but on the other hand, it was said that the cops overreacted, and obviously the jury felt that the cops were right and that Sean was wrong. So, with your character, does your character show any? I hate to use the word empathy, but that's the only one I can think of. Does your character show, or any of your characters show, any empathy for the police?
Well, that's a good question, and that's one of the things I wanted to do with the novel. Is I wanted to show both sides of the story. So we have the character who is the police officer. We get to see how the shooting affected him and his family life and his point of view, and we get to see how the wife was affected. And basically it's up to the audience to decide, which one of the sides they identify with more, if any. But I did want to show both sides of the situation. And basically the point of doing it is to kind of bring light to not only that particular case, but other cases like it, because we're so inundated with these stories in the news that once they go out of the news, we're kind of used to them, and we kind of become desensitized. But the point is that these families still have to deal with that loss.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
how do they continue to deal with it once their story is no longer hot? And even to the a further extent, once they've been told by the courts and by society that the police have been exonerated, what do they do with those feelings? So I wanted to kind of explore that in a fictional way.
That's interesting
get
because
the conversation going.
That's interesting because Ardina and I covered crime for decades, and I know that I was always very empathetic to people who lost family members or friends or even strangers to violence, and I was always very cognizant of wanting to be respectful to them, and always. And I know that you and I have talked about this before, Ardina. But when we leave them, they have to live with that forever, and it's a burden for caring people to recognize that you're only with these people at the worst moments of their lives, and they have to go on with their lives.
It is horrendous. On one hand, you have to cover the news, but on the other hand, you tend to internalize the news, and there's certain stories that stay with you forever. But we are coming up on a break, so stay with us, folks. Amir, hang in there, and we'll have more questions on the other side. 914-636-0110 if folks want to call in.
And now with Fox News commentary, here's Fox News Radio's Top
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Westchester Eye on the Radio, our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. I'm John Sharan, along with Peter Moses, Ardina Seward, and our special phone-in guest, actor turned author Amir J Williams. And Amir, I was curious. There have been quite a few actors who've turned authors. You have Orson Welles, Kirk Douglas, Woody Allen, Tyler Perry, Tina Fey. What do you see as an advantage to being an author over being an actor?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if there's an advantage per se, but I mean, I grew up in a household where reading was very important. My mother made sure that I read very early, and I had a lot of favorite authors growing up, and I always wanted to write, even from very young. So I think that if I could say there was an advantage, is that you get to express yourself fully, whereas being an actor, it's you're playing a character, you're playing things that other people have written, so you don't have that much leeway. But as an author, I get to express
exactly. The words are yours. You're not mouthing somebody else.
And the other thing I was thinking, because I've heard others discuss this, you're not limited by what the camera can capture, and you're also not limited by the time constraints that sometimes you need to have for a film or for a television show.
Exactly.
I know that you were in Yonkers recently, Amir, at the Nepperhan Community Center, for two purposes: to sell your book, and also to reach out to the young people in the neighborhood. What kind of reaction did you get from them?
Well, I mean, I've been living in Yonkers a number of years now, even though I'm not from there. I'm originally born and raised in Manhattan, but I've gotten a great response actually from the town of Yonkers with the book. A lot of people have bought it, and the people that have finished reading it have said that they can't put it down. So I feel really good about that. But also, I wanted to encourage the young people to follow their passion in writing if they have one, and to encourage them to follow their passion in any arts that they might want to do. So that's part of my goal as I go around and do signings and talk to people, to encourage the youth there to pursue that if they wish.
I know particularly in Yonkers there was a wonderful program started by a local resident called Stop and Shake, young guy named, I think it's Hector Santiago, who said that Yonkers police do a great job, and the citizens should take the time when you see a cop to reach out, stop, reach out, and shake that cop's hand. I'm just curious as to if you got any feedback on the relationship between Yonkers residents and Yonkers police.
Well, actually, I mean, we had the captain there that night and another officer there when I was talking about the book. And then I went to a luncheon that they have once a month on Thursday, my first time attending, and there were a retired officer there and another officer there. So I got to get feedback from them firsthand on the premise of the idea, and it was actually very good. I mean, I plan to interview some officers, too, for my next book, and so I can keep that dialogue open and make sure that I get all kinds of feedback on that issue.
That's a wonderful way to start. Now, for young people who want to write books, where do they begin? What courses should they take in school? What do they need to know before they sit down and they put, I want to say pen to paper, but it's not pen to paper. It's actually hands to the keyboard at this point. So what would you suggest? A kid has an idea and he has a great idea about a book. What would you tell him or her?
Well, I would tell them not to wait until they feel like they have to get instruction. I mean, I started writing very early. I remember even 11, writing short stories, and I had great writing teachers in junior high school, great English teachers in junior high school and high school that would give us feedback and encourage us to continue writing, who were very passionate about creative writing. So I wouldn't tell them to wait until they could take certain courses. If they have an idea, they should put it down and just write it. And, the more experience they get writing, the better they'll become. As they say, a writer writes. And also to be great readers, to be avid readers. I mean, part of the reason why I enjoy writing so much and I've come to have a passion for it was because of the people that I read as a youth. And you can't be a great writer unless you read, because that's where you get inspiration from. That's how you build your vocabulary. And so I would encourage them to read first and foremost and just write. They have ideas, put them down and continue to write.
What's particularly interesting that, ironically, the whole rappers movement has spurred a new generation of writers. Because if you can't write poetry, if you're not a wordsmith, then you cannot rap. So is there
That's
a
very
way?
True.
You understand what I mean? So is there a way to kind of use rap as a vehicle to foster young writers, to take rap and kind of use rap as a method of expanding to a larger format?
I definitely believe that there is. I mean, I think that a long time ago when rap was just, a burgeoning art form, a lot of people didn't see it as music, and people that are not into it still don't see it as music. But the reality is that they're already writers. Now you have writers within that genre of varying degrees, just like any other. But the reality is that they are writers already. They are poets already. And so we can always continue to encourage those that are already rapping or writing or doing art in any form to continue to get better at it, to learn from those that have come before them, to have mentors. And we just got to encourage it when we see it, especially here in Westchester. So the artists work together, and I've got a chance to work with other artists and meet other artists here. And I think we need to continue to do that because there are a lot of talented people here in Westchester, right here in Yonkers, as a matter of fact.
And what about people writing from their own personal experiences? I've heard people say, I've talked with friends and said, well, why don't you write a book? And they'll always say, well, my life is boring, nobody would read it. But everybody has a story to tell. So if people are reticent about writing about about themselves or about their own life experience, how would you direct them?
Well, I would say maybe you could find somebody to write the story for you. I mean, a lot of the greatest stories are not always written by the people who lived them. But, I've had a couple of people approach me to do that, and I've been interested in doing it for people. There's a number of ways that you could approach that, but you should always write things down if you have them in your head. And then later on you can figure out what's the best way to go about them, whether you want to do it yourself or have somebody else do it. But definitely write them down. If you have stories or if you have things from your past that you think to help, because we never know how us telling our personal story can help others.
You're going to have to hold the thought there, Amir, because we have to take another break. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Turan, along with Peter Moses and Ardina Seward, and we're speaking with actor-turned-author Amir Jamal Williams. We'll be back with more right after this brief Fox News break.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Charan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
We are back live with Westchester Eye on the Radio. I am Ardina, and my co-hosts are Peter Moses and John the Man Charan. And we are in the second half of our show. And our guest for the second half is Denise Cooney. Denise is a lot of things. Number one, she's a paramedic, but she's also a clinical social worker. And there was a tragic suicide in downtown Yonkers this weekend. A young man, 22 years old, killed himself. The circumstances around his suicide are yet to be disclosed, and frankly, they aren't even that important. The point is that this young man killed himself. It's a holiday season, and a lot of people become depressed. They become suicidal. So I would like you to talk a little bit, Denise, about how we can spot that in our loved ones.
Hi, Ardina, and thank you so much for having me on the air. It's really a tragedy when anyone takes their life, and for family members or friends or loved ones that's observing someone that has decided to take their life, there are some really key warning signs about depression that make it really clear for the family and others to be able to identify a shift. If someone has become more, I would say, isolated, not observing relationships as they have in the past, if they stop enjoying life in general, and definitely have signs of pulling back from their favorite activities. It could be something as simple as someone who loved to run or work out, and they stop. You start noticing that maybe they're dressing a little differently, they're sleeping more, or they may be sleeping less. And definitely there's going to be a change in their eating habits. Now, that is a very clinical sign of depression. Now, you ask a very key question. How do you know when somebody's about to end their life, or, as we say in the field, complete suicide? An individual will all of a sudden make a 180-degree shift in personality. They'll be very happy when they've been very sad or withdrawn. And another key thing to look out for is they start giving away prized possessions. An individual will know that fairly soon they're going to end their life, and they start giving things away. And they'll even speak to you in a way that maybe you've never heard them speak before. They'll tell you very personal information about, oh, over here is where I keep my checkbook, or over here is where I keep my keys to my car. So things that seem very personalized, like, oh, we're really getting closer, could also be a very big sign that they want you to handle their end-of-life decision by passing on information
And
to their family or friends.
How do you discern the difference? It sounds like it sounds very difficult. I mean, I'm a parent with one child, and Ardina has a daughter, and people are moody. And how is it that you're supposed to distinguish between normal behavior that sometimes vacillates one way or another and something as life-changing as someone contemplating suicide?
Okay, well, that's a very, very good question, because when you're talking about teenagers many times exhibit similar signs to individuals.
Right, I'm sure that's what Ardina and I are both thinking about.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So with teenagers, it's a little bit different. With teenagers, you're going to see a child usually start acting out more or withdrawing more. Now, I'm not talking about like a switch that hits, I'm talking about a progressive disease process, because depression is a disease. A person is clinically depressed if they've been in a state for more than, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. So it's a steady, progressive mood change. It isn't something that happens for a week and then, they're angry with a friend and they're withdrawn, or they're yelling at you or pull back. I'm not talking about normal teenage angst. I'm talking about teenagers who are depressed, actually exhibit signs of listening to music many times that talk about end of life. And I'm not just talking about kids that are into goth or heavy rock or heavy metal, I should say. I'm talking about children that all of a sudden have made a big switch, and they start withdrawing from their friends. And that is a really big clinical sign. It's different than just withdrawing from a parent. I think that's normal teenage behavior. But when a child starts withdrawing from even their friends and starts missing key elements in their life, or they used to study, they got straight A's, or if they got B's or C's, whatever they, were achieving, they have no effort. There's absolutely no effort in anything that they're doing anymore. And they'll even say things like, well, what's the point? And if you're a teenager, say, what's the point? You can say, okay, this is normal teenage angst, or you could really sit down and say, I'm here for you. And the other thing that I tell parents all the time, especially when children have mood disorders, or if they have family members, if you have a family member that's clinically depressed, we're not certain, but if there could be a little heredity going on, it does not hurt to ask a child, do you want to harm yourself? Have you thought about taking their life? This is such a big question to ask, but it is one of the most important questions an individual can ask their child. And asking the question does not give them the idea. This is a training that I do with individuals in the emergency medical field, that it's really important to recognize the signs and symptoms of depression when a person is moving forward towards contemplating taking their life. The other thing that you can look out for in teenagers is parents may not like to think about this, but if a child has turned to drugs and it's been very difficult to wake up a child, and you think like, what's going on? You're doing drugs. It may be a cry for help. It may be a failed suicide attempt. And things that parents really need to know, that if a child is a cutter, that does not automatically mean that the child is going to complete or contemplate suicide. So there's so many different variables to this. It's really unfortunate that this happens. And I'm speaking somewhat from personal experience with a friend of mine, that I never realized the signs and symptoms of when someone was contemplating suicide. So that's why I'm very tuned into this. And after I had gone to college, developed my practice, that's the one thing I'm very passionate about, is awakening people to understanding that depression is something that a person can't snap out of.
But, Denise, even before the signs become so overt, there is help. I think part of the problem is that in particular communities, such as the African American community, there's a certain stigma about seeking help. And Amir, if you're still on the line, I'd like you to talk about that and about people. It's also at people of color in the Hispanic community, which I'm very familiar with. Part of that is my family heritage. Going for help is considered taboo. But we have Amir we still have the other guest on the line, Amir Williams, who is a novelist, but also someone who's from the African American community. So Amir, if you're still there, I'd like you to weigh in on that and what the attitudes are about seeking help.
Sure. I think there's a couple of factors there. For one, in the African American community, there may be a stigma about talking. There is a stigma about talking about mental health and things of that nature, emotions. But I think also as a male, it goes even further than that. As a male, the idea that we can reveal our feelings or things that we're dealing with.
Okay, you're going to have to. I got to interrupt you. You're going to have to hold your point because we're coming up on a break. I want to review that on the other side of the break. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. Our guests today are Denise Cooney and Amir Jamal Williams. with very important information. Stay with us, folks. We will be back, and we hope that you too will be back.
$1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Westchester Eye on the Radio, our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. Right now we're speaking with Denise Cooney, a person who's involved with dealing with depression, and also the author Amir Williams. And Amir, we had a break there for a second there, but you were telling us a little bit about the concept of dealing with depression in the African American community, and we had to interrupt you. So why don't you pick it up again and finish your thought?
Thank you. Well, I was just saying that we have a definite stigma in the community about talking about mental health, that even mental health even exists. But also as a male, it goes even further. The idea that, we can be dealing with overwhelming feelings of anxiety or depression and be able to speak about those. And I think that as a society and as just as individuals, if we provide the idea that people can come and talk to us, that is an availability for males, especially African American males, to do this, that a lot of that we would interrupt some of these suicides that are going on. I think that we need to re-examine how we look at males and how they deal with mental health as a society and as individuals in general.
What are your Denise? I'd like to switch back to you and ask you what your feelings are about that. Do you think that there is a difference in attitudes towards mental health between male and female?
Absolutely. And I want to really commend Amir for utilizing the phrase stigma, because that's the whole issue with mental health, is no one has a problem saying, Ardina, I have a cold. You go, oh, Denise, I'm really sorry. Ardina, I have the flu. Oh, you'll get, I hope you get better. Can I give you something? But when someone says, I'm depressed, people turn away. And Amir, you are spot on about men not asking for help, because men are primarily fixers. They fix things. And if we take the idea of depression as being a part of the mind, right? So the brain is the last frontier. You always hear about Star Trek, the last frontier. But the brain really is the last frontier. And I want you to visualize this for a moment. The brain goes throughout your entire body. It's just not in the head, right? The spinal cord and then the nerve endings, everything is controlled by the brain. And the brain we're still doing research on it. So, Amir, I'm going to extend an invitation to you. And as a licensed clinical social worker, I would like to sit down with you to bring community together, to destigmatize this, and get our men and our women on board with understanding that they don't have a problem saying they have high blood pressure. No one says they have any problem saying they have diabetes. We have to take this out of the shadows and allow individuals to know that our mental health is equally as important as our physical health and our spiritual health. We are mind, body, and spirit. We cannot separate that any more than we can take our left hand and take it and say that's our right hand. It is an integral part of who we are.
And I want to ask you, Denise, in addition to counseling, how great a role does medication play in helping people who have anxiety and who have depression? Because a lot of people will just say, oh, I'm going to pop a pill instead of going to see my psychologist. Is that a cure-all, or does it work in concert, medication plus counseling?
I would say just because you have the keys to a Ferrari doesn't mean you know how to drive it. So, medication.
Everybody's laughing.
Very, very well put.
That's brilliant.
Medication can help, but I don't think you should be reliant only upon medication, because there are ways of working through anxiety without medication. But depression, that has a chemical reaction Just like if a person is an insulin-dependent diabetic, you wouldn't say to them, you know what, we're going on a trip. Just leave your insulin at home because I don't have a refrigerator. So, with depression, it's a different disease process, right? And disease is just dis-ease. You know what I mean? So, we can work through things. We can definitely work through things.
I think Amir, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I heard
Yes,
you.
I just wanted to say I've had an opportunity to speak with some people that contemplated suicide and research for another project. And I'm actually, there's another writer here in Yonkers, and I've partnered up with her. Her name is Hope Hollingsworth Coaxum. She has 5 books of her own and has written a play called The Diary of a Mother, in which it chronicles mothers that have lost their children in different ways. And one of those losses is a suicide due to bullying. So we want to attack these issues in the art form any way that we can. And I've had an opportunity to talk with people that wanted to commit suicide and that were cutters to find out how they feel about these things.
Right. And that's what I was saying. Just because a person cuts doesn't mean they're going to complete the act. Cutting sometimes for individuals is a way to release the tension, to feel, because it gets them out of their depression. So I'm with you. I have also spoken with people that were sitting on the edge, so to speak, and just by being an active listener, you don't walk up to a person who has depression and tell them to snap out of it.
Let me just ask a question before we continue. If anyone wants to reach either one of you, can each of you give information so that people can reach out to you?
I can leave a phone number. Mm-hmm.
Please do.
Okay, you could give that out now, Denise, if you want.
It's area code 201-264-3794.
Is there an email also?
Yes, there's Denise, DENISER, Cooney, COO, N as in Nancy, EY, @gmail.com. And I'll answer all calls and emails. This is very important to me. I work with EMS providers. I work with firefighters. I work with individuals who are in the private sector. I really want to take this stigma of the sorrow and despair that people go through. I don't want people to think that they're alone, even though they feel like they are. Like Amir stated, he's spoken to people. There are people like Amir and myself who are willing to be there for you.
That's great, but let's get to the information from Amir as well, okay?
Yeah, sure. I have a website. It's Class 5 Incorporated, CALSS, the number 5, Incorporated.com. And that's where you can purchase the book and also leave me messages there to get in contact with me. On Instagram, I'm nation_of_flame. And there, that page on Instagram is dedicated to victims of police shootings, so you can reach me there. Also, AJ Williams on Facebook.
Now, Amir, you also write poetry?
Yes, I have some poetry.
My favorite poet died last year. His name was Michael S. Harper. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's probably he and Rita Dove are the two best-known black poets of the last 50 years. Rita Dove was the poet laureate of the United States. Michael S. Harper was a poetry professor at Brown. He wrote his first book of poetry was called Dear John, Dear Coltrane. It was very much about jazz and about, of course, people like John Coltrane. And he also wrote about depression. He wrote about a lot of other things in the African-American community. And he wrote my favorite poem, which is called number 24, which is about Willie Mays, who, believe it or not, people don't know this, but he suffers from bipolarism and depression, and he's my only hero in life, but that's his life. Ardina, who do we have for next week?
We finally going to have the return of Jerry Azar, who was supposed to be on this week, but he got his schedule confused. So we're going to have Azar talking sports next week, and FYI, this show will be archived on YouTube. So if you missed the information, folks, you can get it all on the show on the YouTube.
Okay, great. You guys have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.